Oshawa has been building cars, GM has been building cars in Oshawa for 100 years. They bought the plant from the McLaughlin Company in 1918. It's 2019 now. It's been 100 years. And when GM made the announcement in November 26, 2018, it was the 100th anniversary, which is kind of a tragic irony. So what does the closure mean? It means losing over 15,000 jobs in Ontario. So that's a big hit. So the closure of GM Oshawa and downsizing to potentially, they're saying 300 jobs in the stamping and painting plant. So you're losing 15,000 jobs overall. About 5,000 of those jobs are manufacturing jobs. So there's around 2,500 direct GM employees, people that are in this room, some of them are my friends and family members. And then there's part suppliers that also work side by side in the plant. And then there's external part suppliers that also work. So we're losing a lot of jobs with this closure. And we're losing $4 billion in the Ontario economy every year. So I'm just going to remind people, back in 2009, Canadian taxpayer and Ontario taxpayers bailed GM out because they were very close to bankruptcy. We provided $11 billion in that bailout. They haven't paid back $3 billion. So that's a place to start with negotiations, I think. And in the United States, the US government bailed them out for $50 billion, and they haven't been paid back $11 billion. Now, GM made an $11 billion profit last year, so it's not like they can't pay the money back. And I know any of you, including me in this room, that have loans, we pay our loans back. So I was saying in 2018, GM globally made an $11 billion US dollar profit on $147 billion in sales. So this is the question that we started thinking about back in January, February, when Green Jobs Oshawa and the Centre for Social Justice and the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation got together to think about what could be done. Instead of just accepting the closure of the plant, what could we do instead of just accepting that? And so we were thinking about battery electric vehicles. And we thought, instead of just looking at it strictly from a financial point of view, the finances are important, I'm going to go through the numbers, but there's social aspects that are important. People's jobs and livelihoods and families and community. So the social aspect is also an important bottom line. And then the environmental part. So we all know we're facing a climate catastrophe. We have to do something about it. What are we waiting for? This is an option and an opportunity for us to take some of that power into our own hands as people in Canada and people in Oshawa, to take that triple bottom line, the economic part, the financial part, the social and the environmental. So we wanted to evaluate this feasibility from that triple bottom line point of view. Everyone here probably understands that electric vehicles are the future, and we have to move away from using fossil fuels and the internal combustion engine. And it's going to take some time, and there's going to be a transition, and we need to think about the workers that are in these industries, including, oil sands workers, etc. But we need to look at a just transition towards an electric future. If you look at all the market research, I looked at a lot of it. Battery electric vehicles are going to, at some point in the next 5 to 10 years, just explode in terms of sales. So by 2018, the auto companies had already invested about $90 billion in manufacturing, battery technology, research and development, and battery electric vehicles. A lot of that money is going to China. They have about 55% of the market globally right now for battery electric vehicles. They have a lot of supportive government policies in China to do that, including government ownership of manufacturing facilities together with General Motors and other European auto manufacturers. GM production has shifted from Canada over the years, you know this, to China and Mexico. And GM has no plans that we're aware of building any battery electric vehicles in Canada. So at the peak here at this plant in Oshawa, there was about 23,000 people that were working in the plant and related manufacturing jobs. we're going down to 300 workers potentially. Now the reason GM has shifted their workforce is pretty obvious, and it's been allowed through free trade agreements and the elimination of the auto pact. So GM pays $6.80 an hour right now for workers in their assembly plants in China, and $1.30 to $4 per hour in Mexico. And what we're talking about in this preliminary feasibility study is a one-tier wage system, not a two-tier or a three-tier. One tier at $35 an hour, starting at 35, and increasing the numbers that we have in the feasibility study, increasing by 2% per year inflation, or the consumer price index. And that's from the Parliamentary Budget Office. That's their forecast, not mine. I don't try to forecast inflation, because I don't know what's going to happen with inflation. But apparently they do, so I use their numbers. So here's the alternative. The alternative is to have democratic public ownership. And that starts with the Government of Canada stepping up to the plate. Now, I was being interviewed by a CBC and City TV journalist earlier, and they asked, isn't this kind of an unrealistic project? And I don't think it is, because when you look at the Government of Canada, they have 45 crown corporations, or public enterprises. Many of them are very successful. They have over $1 trillion in assets in those crown corporations. And it's totally feasible, when you see the numbers that I've got here, for the Government of Canada to step up and do this. Remind yourself that just last year they spent $4.8 billion on the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is actually going in the opposite direction of the triple bottom line that I'm talking about here. So we need some leadership from the Government of Canada. We're in a federal election right now. Go to the all candidates meetings and talk to the candidates about this. Confront them with questions about what are you going to do about the Oshawa plant? Like, it's 10 million square feet and all these people. And we've got young people that need work too, and this community is going to really suffer without it. So we can retool the plant. Government procurement. So we've got people here from the postal workers, and there's a 13,000 vehicle fleet that Canada Post owns. In the United States, it's 180,000. In Germany, it's 70,000. The United States already has a request for proposals out in the public for electrifying their whole 180,000 fleet. Surely we can beat them to the punch and do that in Canada with 13,000. Triple bottom line business case, we're going to talk a bit more about that and see how we're measuring that, because a lot of this is about, you know, what the numbers are and what makes sense. Okay, so this is a graph that shows the estimated fleets for the Canadian government, the Ontario government, and then the top 20 municipalities or municipal governments in Ontario. So these are estimates that I've come up with, and they would have to be confirmed and discussed with the different organizations and their procurement people and see what their plans are. We go to a next step after this of doing a full feasibility study. And you can see that over the 5 years of our forecasts, our financial forecasts, by replacing 85% of those postal vehicles with battery electric vehicles over 5 years, the US again is replacing 180,000 within a 6-year period. So we can certainly do 13,000 or even 11,000 over 5 years. And then other public service vehicles and RCMP vehicles. So this doesn't include the Canadian military. And then the Ontario government, we feel that's going to be a little more challenging, possibly. We'll see, but they do have a much smaller fleet. The municipal governments have bigger fleets. They run parks and recreation, they do road maintenance, they have police forces, so there's lots of ambulances, so there's all kinds of vehicles, public vehicles that could be manufactured right here in this plant and shift towards battery electric vehicles. These are the total numbers of vehicles being manufactured. So I think last year there was around 174,000 vehicles manufactured. So that would be trucks and 2 sedans in the GM plant here. And we're talking about, this is basically like a startup business, right? Because we're starting with a whole new technology. And starting with 8,000 vehicles, full 100% government procurement in that first year to get a kickstart. And then over time, more government procurement, as well as starting to sell to private fleets. And one of the things we've been thinking about is municipal governments and their public transit systems. We could have rideshare programs with battery electric vehicles to take people to the subway or the GO station, and everyone wouldn't have to park their individual car there. So there's ways that we could organize that, but it would be municipally owned. It wouldn't be Uber, it wouldn't be Lyft. We could own that ourselves and make that happen. So these are the 3 vehicles that we're looking at initially. And remember, this is just a preliminary study, right? So when we embarked on this, we really didn't know if this thing would work. It can work, and we have a big advantage. We don't have to maximize shareholders' wealth. That's what the auto companies are focused on. We can create and build good jobs. We can do it and decrease greenhouse gases, and we can also do it in a financially viable way in the long term. And I'm going to show you how. Okay, so the forecasted sales revenue based on those numbers of vehicles, the average price of the vehicle being around $40,000, very reasonable. We're looking at sales growing from the first year of $340 million to $2.2 billion in year 5. Again, very, very reasonable forecast, quite conservative from my background's in accounting and finance, and it's quite a reasonable conservative forecast. And here's what the percentage of the new vehicle market. So basically right now there's about 2 million new vehicles sold that are light duty trucks, SUVs, and sedans. 70% of that market is SUVs and light duty trucks right now, which use the most gas. So it's not exactly a good thing for the environment. But we're looking at the market share of 0.4% growing to 2.5. Very reasonable, completely doable from a financial point of view. It makes sense. Here's the number of jobs. So I did two different scenarios in this preliminary feasibility study. The first scenario has a lot more parts manufacturing being done in the plant. That's how they used to be done. And then they started contracting out to all these private companies that supply the parts, and then all you do here now is assemble them. Tesla makes most of their parts in their own factory. Why do they do that? Well, because they're going to get a better product from doing that, right? So that's what they're looking at. And we're looking at in scenario 1, there'll still be outside parts suppliers that will provide some parts, and certainly batteries probably, which is a big component to a battery electric vehicle. But in scenario 1, we have more internal part manufacturing within the manufacturing facility. So there's more jobs involved. And in scenario 2, we have more external parts, about 80%. And I think right now, this plant's operating around 90% external parts. So it's still a little bit lower than that. And then I already talked about the tier 1 wage, that it's equal pay for equal work. So here's the investment that we're forecasting. So we looked at what the estimated value of GM is globally, and then we split it down to, okay, what is it in Canada, and then what is the GM Oshawa plant itself. And we're not looking at necessarily real estate value, we're looking at the enterprise value of GM, given what it's producing and what its cash flow is. So the estimated value for GM Oshawa in scenario 1, where we would take the whole plant over, but not the technology center or the test track. They can keep that. We don't want it. But it'd be 1.3 billion estimated. And in scenario 2, there would be the assembly plant, and then we would share some of the other facilities. So it wouldn't be a full purchase of the full plant. So it's a smaller number, 800 million. Retooling for BEV production from an internal combustion engine vehicle, we're looking at 400 to 600 million to retool the plant to do that. I prefer scenario 1 because it helps the manufacturing have more control right here in the plant here. Okay, so the plant itself, I'm not an engineer, but we've talked to engineers, we've talked to auto workers who've worked in the plant for a long time. And the Oshawa plant has everything that we need to make these BEVs. And really important, we have the skilled workers and ability and knowledge. Basically, the people here can make anything they put their mind to. And that's really exciting. So you know, this preliminary feasibility study is focused on battery electric vehicles, but there's all kinds of other products that could be made too that would serve the needs of people and also decrease climate change gases. And Canadian companies that we have already existing can help supply some of these parts and have the technology to support this public enterprise. We think that one of the objectives from a triple bottom line is to keep this manufacturing capacity in Canada for the people of Canada, to help us create the future that we need and to create a resilient community and society as we're facing this climate catastrophe. So we think it's really crucial for us to keep that in our communities. Here's some other examples quickly of auto plants for BEVs in other areas. So Flint, Michigan, that was the first film that Michael Moore made, I think, was about what, something, Roger and Me, thank you. That was a good movie. Anyway, Mahindra is an automaker from India. They are bidding on that US Postal Service contract for 180,000 BEVs. And they want to buy the Flint plant and make those BEVs. So the former CEO of BEV Workhorse, which is a pickup truck, they want to purchase GM Lordstown, and they're trying to raise $400 million to do that. Rivian, which is a startup BEV, recreational SUV, pickup truck kind of company, they've already purchased for 2.4 million square feet a plant for $21 million Canadian from Mitsubishi in Normal, Illinois. And they've invested $231 million. So you see the numbers that we're talking about here, very reasonable, very doable. And then Tesla, he purchased the former Newton GM Toyota plant, which was a joint venture, for $78 million Canadian in 2010. So that was a fire sale. That plant was in perfect shape. So the financial forecast in terms of government procurement, which is an important part of this, and when you look at the transition from internal combustion engines to battery electric vehicles in other countries, government procurement is always part of that strategy. So we feel that we're right on board, same idea as some other countries that have already gone in this direction. So you can see the Canadian government's just over 6,000 vehicles in year one. Municipal governments, the top 20 biggest ones in Ontario, are 1,400, and the government of Ontario is 530. Maybe we can convince them to buy a few more. And this is an income statement summary. Like I said, I've got all these spreadsheets. I'd be happy to show you the spreadsheets. I have nothing to hide. All the formulas are in there. But this is the summary income statement, and it shows from years 1 to 3, which is very common for a startup business that loses money. So you have to raise enough capital to cover that working capital the first 3 years. It breaks even in year 4, and then it makes a nice little profit, $12, $13 million in year 5. This is completely financially viable. All the ratios, all the financial benchmarks I've taken from original equipment manufacturers, small, medium, and large size companies in the auto industry, including startups like Tesla. Now, Tesla's never made money, right? So they've got 28 billion in sales, but they can, and they're going to make money, obviously. But we can do better than that with much fewer vehicles and a much smaller investment. We can make money on a smaller investment. So the democratic public ownership. So public enterprises right across the globe play an important part in all economies. They represent over 20% of the largest enterprises in the world. So there's a lot of big ones out there. One of the biggest ones in Canada is the Canada Pension Plan. So as I said earlier, the Government of Canada owns 45 public enterprises worth over $1 trillion. So the capital's there, the money's there. We can do this. And we've done it lots of times before. In Ontario, Ontario Hydro is a public enterprise, and it became a model for public utilities around the world. And then just recently, like about 20 years ago, the Ernie Eve and Mike Harris government started to privatize it. So they said the prices were going to go down. It didn't work. We think public enterprise is the way to go. I already talked about the Canada Pension Plan. Now what's interesting is when you do the research on this, yes, the Canadian government has a lot of public enterprises, but provincial and municipal governments have even more. So there's possibilities for investment from the province of Ontario and the municipalities. So I said that we're not including in the purchase the technology center or test track. Instead, what we want to do is build a state-of-the-art environment and transportation hub with engineers, millwrights, technicians, electricians, to build the products that we need for our future here in Ontario and in Canada. And we think, I mean, you can use your imagination and think about all kinds of things, but it's hard to predict what kind of great products could come out of that. Now, we did interview a number of GM workers for this feasibility study to get their point of view, and you're going to hear from some of them a little bit later tonight. But they all agreed that the GM plant in Oshawa can do what we want to do, and that the skills and abilities are there to do it. And what are we waiting for? There's a climate crisis, we need to do it. So the GM workers are certainly online. From an environmental point of view, so that's the third part of the triple bottom line. So transportation is the #2 source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. That's from Transport Canada. Half of those come from cars and light trucks, including SUVs. Now, if you're going to introduce battery electric vehicles and decrease climate change gases, you have to make sure the electricity that's powering those battery electric vehicles is not made from fossil fuels, right? It's got to be generated from renewable or non-emitting sources. So in Ontario, 93% of the electricity created in Ontario is from non-fossil fuel sources. So we've got nuclear, hydro, wind, and solar that can power these battery electric vehicles. And a really cool thing is when you park your battery electric vehicle at night, it can act as a storage. All those vehicles can act as storage for the electricity that's being created through renewable energy. So it works both ways. Like, it's very complementary to a renewable energy system. Makes a lot of sense. So the estimated greenhouse gas reductions over the first 5 years, 400,000 metric tons. So that's 150,000 cars, trucks, SUVs taken off the road, replaced by battery electric vehicles, and that's the impact. That's a really significant impact. So the public opinion, like, we are in a federal election, so what is the public opinion saying? So 84% of Canadians, this was from July 2019, a large Abacus poll, I think the sample was 2,000 people, which is a good sample size. 84% of Canadians say that one thing we could do to decrease greenhouse gases is have government procurement of battery electric vehicles. Well, that sounds familiar. And people want to ban the sales of internal combustion engine by 2030, so that was 67% of Canadians. 72% support a Green New Deal, which I think people are going to talk a bit about tonight. And something that's happening right around the world, the green bond market. So when you make an investment, you make an investment that's going to give you a return, but also that's being invested to decrease in industries that decrease climate change gases. That's what green bonds are. 65% of Canadians would buy a green bond, like a victory bond they used to sell in the Second World War, right? But that bond market is growing incredibly fast all around the world. So here's the conclusion. So the triple bottom line. We can forecast a reasonable and conservative break even by year 4 and make a reasonable profit in year 5. So the financial, check, looks good. The capital investment, that has to be negotiated, obviously. And there's that outstanding money, that $3 billion from the bailout that's still owed the taxpayers of Canada. That'd be a good place to start the negotiations. But that 1.2 to 1.9 billion includes the retrofitting to battery electric vehicles. We could create over 13,000 jobs, so up to 2,900 manufacturing related jobs, including 600 parts supplier jobs, and over 10,000 multiplier jobs. So multiplier jobs, economists use a figure for manufacturing in the auto sector of 5 to 9. Some people even go as high as 10. We used 5 to be conservative. So that could be higher. And then decreasing greenhouse gases by 400,000 metric tons by year 5. So that's the triple bottom line, feasibility. We go back to our original question, could this be done? The answer is yes.
Okay, so we're just hearing, thank you very much, Russ. I'm going to move into, we have a few comments from our community and organizations. So Rebecca Keetch is an auto worker and an organizer with Green Jobs Oshawa. Green Jobs Oshawa is a coalition of workers, community leaders, environmentalists, labor and social justice advocates, all working towards the common goal of placing the soon-to-be nearly empty Oshawa Assembly Facility under public ownership in order to repurpose it for socially beneficial manufacturing. Let's hear it for Rebecca.
Hi. I'm really excited to see everybody here tonight and that it's such a good turnout because we are here tonight to talk about what's possible. We are here to talk whether battery electric vehicle production is possible in Oshawa. Is government investment and public ownership possible in Oshawa? Is maintaining the productive capacity of the Oshawa Assembly Plant possible? And is building a new way of thinking that prioritizes the environment, the community, and citizens of our country over corporate greed possible? The answer to all of these questions is yes. However, it is only possible if we start having a bigger conversation around what it will actually take to address the climate crisis, rising inequality, and increasingly precarious work. We need to have a conversation about the fact that profit-driven corporations are not going to put public need ahead of their own bottom line. They never have, and they never will. The announcement by GM in November 2018, at a time of record profits, to close the Oshawa Assembly Plant, along with 4 other plants in the States, sent feelings of hurt, anger, and betrayal through the communities across North America. These announcements should make all of us furious, whether we are auto workers or not. Approximately 10 years ago, the Canadian government bailed out GM with billions of our dollars. Our government invested in that company because we knew the value of good-paying manufacturing jobs. The workers have invested by giving massive concessions to keep auto production in Canada. The public has invested by buying GM products and supporting their record profits. And what did GM give us in return? They failed to pay back almost $3 billion of the bailout money and then announced the closure of the Oshawa plant. This is what corporate greed gets us. Our community and our province deserve better. So what is the solution? Many have heard about a Green New Deal, and that is a policy framework that tackles the environmental crisis, rising inequality, and precarious work. It calls for massive government investment to move to a green new economy. But it also makes workers and communities central in this transition. A Green New Deal also calls for good jobs to be created and just transition planning so that workers and communities thrive as we move to a green economy instead of getting left behind. What would it take to make Oshawa the center of a Green New Deal? To move from the theoretical discussion to a concrete example of what can be done. And it takes political will. It takes changing the conversation and thinking bigger than we have ever thought before. It takes demanding climate action and economic justice for workers. As Russ has shown us, electric vehicle production anchored by government procurement needs is possible. Are we willing to think big enough? To dream big enough? To make public ownership, democratic planning for the environment, and green vehicle production a reality in Oshawa? We need to address the climate crisis. We need good jobs to fight inequality and precarity. We have a plant, a skilled workforce, and a big idea. All we need is the political will and to not be afraid to think big. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker is Scott Acano. Scott is a researcher and expert in economic policy who has studied the Oshawa economy and job market for the last 5 years. He holds a PhD in political science from York University, as well as a fellowship in international political economy and innovation economics from the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Please welcome Scott.
Thanks, Tiffany. Is this okay? Good. So I want to divide my time into 3 comments. The first 2 will be very general points about how this report should be evaluated and how it fits into the local economic ecosystem. The third will summarize my assessment of its findings and its methodology. First, in my view, any meaningful assessment of this report cannot take shape from the conventional mode of thinking about industrial policy, which all too often views state planning as both inefficient and wasteful. This view neglects, as Russ has convincingly demonstrated, all of the very successful episodes of state economic planning that have served to build innovative capacity locally, nationally, and of course internationally as well. Moreover, it fails to take seriously enough the scope of the environmental crisis. Addressing this crisis requires bold thinking and widespread experimentation, especially given that Canada is nowhere on course to meet its international obligations. It requires the type of coordinated planning that we are seeing this weekend in New York and technocratic approaches like a carbon tax, but requires also reimagining how local and national economies can and should operate. There is no precedent, of course, for the scale of change necessary to confront the climate crisis. Subsequently, new proposals cannot be evaluated on the basis of previous standards, especially those that offer a very narrow and impressionistic reading of economic history and public planning. My second point is that the industrial capacity that exists locally, that resides with the accumulated knowledge and skills of auto workers, represents, in fact, a very important reservoir of innovation and economic potential. This knowledge can be further developed by utilizing the resources of surrounding educational and knowledge institutions, making Oshawa a prime location for the development of BEVs, as well as other key green products like wind turbines and solar panels. This report does extremely well to recognize these repositories of leading edge knowledge and to confront the binarism that all too often absorbs our thinking about policy between the old technologies of the past and the quote-unquote new technologies of the present. This report understands also that preserving and animating Canada's industrial capacity in this way has the very important benefit of replenishing the local pool of good jobs and reversing the cycle of automotive restructuring that has played out locally for much of the last 30 years, whereby displaced auto workers have often re-entered the job market in low-wage, non-standard forms of exploitative employment. So given that I only have 3 minutes or so to speak, this now leads to my summary comment about the report and the policy idea, the very creative policy idea enclosed in it. Bearing in mind, of course, that this is a preliminary study. It offers, in my view, a serious and extremely well-developed case for green economic programming that realizes the limits of evaluating environmental and social justice initiatives on the basis solely of profitability and competitiveness criteria. The report takes seriously the IPCC's policy guidance and scientific conclusions and offers a concrete proposal for addressing climate change that exists, or builds out rather, the very general roadmap laid down by the Green New Deal with its emphasis on decarbonization and just transition. Russ, congratulations on a job well done.
Thank you very much, Scott. Our next speaker is John Lawrence. John Lawrence is the president of the Oshawa local of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, also known as CUPW. CUPW has a campaign called Delivering Community Power, a campaign that has a plan for a 100% renewable economy that addresses inequality, empowers us to make change, and improves our lives. Let's welcome John.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you everybody for listening to me tonight. I'm excited to be here because I think this is a pivotal time in our country, and it's a pivotal time for the next generation. As a postal worker, I'd like to take a second to say thank you for the support you've given us in this town over the years, and we're willing to give it back. And I bring that up because we're still in negotiations, and one of the negotiation issues that we're dealing with in our negotiations, we were trying to break ground on the labor movement, is the green movement. We're demanding that the post office take into account when they make decisions the environment and the climate. We've got the largest fleet in Canada. We have the largest retail network. We have 35% more locations than Tim Hortons does. We don't have as good a coffee, but we have great service. So I think the biggest hurdle here, listening to all these speakers, my thoughts are more passionate than technical. But I think the biggest hurdle that we're going to face doing this is attitude. So I think every bit of change that we've experienced over the last couple of years, and it's gaining momentum, it's going exponential. I can't believe the amount of changes. It all starts with a thought, and then that thought starts as a conversation. And then that conversation changes to engagement. And I think we need to start looking at our politicians, and the ones that say this can't be done, we just dismiss. We don't even talk to them, we walk past them, and we look for the future. Russ, you talked about a triple bottom line, and I think there's more than that, because there's also the next generation of youth that see no hope. They see spiraling costs, they see lack of opportunity. Mental health, I don't know what that costs this province, but that has to be factored in as well. And you start to give the next generation hope, and you're going to solve a lot of the social problems that we have today. There's also going to be a fight coming with big business, because just like marijuana is to tobacco, and Beyond Meat is to the beef producers in this country, they see the world changing, and they see their business models declining, and they're shifting, they're transitioning. The automakers of North America and the world are going to see the next shift, and that's electric vehicles. And I think that we can break new ground, and we can be the forefront. And we've shown the country that labor can do anything in this country. We can solve any problem, and we're up to this challenge. Thank you.
Our next speaker is James Hunt, who is the Senior Manager of Programming at The Leap, where he works with different social movements to cross-pollinate ideas and collectively create transformative change. He is most passionate about connecting labor with the climate justice movement. James has led advocacy for a number of unions and organizations, including the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, the Canadian Health Coalition, and Overdose Prevention Ottawa. Let's hear it for James.
Thank you. I'm humbled to be sharing the stage with so many brilliant speakers, and I hope I can do justice to your brilliance. Just before I start, I'd love to get a read of the room. If I can I get a show of hands for everyone here who actually works at the plant? Or retiree. Okay. And can I get a show of hands for everyone whose family or friend or knows someone who works at the plant? Almost the entire room. Amazing. And last question I'll ask now is, how many people here have heard of a Green New Deal? About half the room. Great. So in my work with the Leap, I work with climate activists and organizations across the country and the United States. And one of the most pressing concepts right now is a Green New Deal. And it's a framework that emerged out of the United States, but has quickly spread to Canada and other countries. And it's an ambitious plan to tackle the biggest crises of our time. That is climate change and inequality. It's calling for massive public action and massive public investment to create a better world, to tackle the twin roots of social and environmental issues in climate change. And so it's calling for massive investments in public infrastructure, like affordable housing for everybody. It's calling for massive investments in public transportation. And of course, to scale up renewable jobs and energy. But the other element of it is it's calling for a good job guarantee, so that every single person who wants it can have a good, green, unionized job. And this is incredibly important, because any climate plan worth its salt knows that it's going to start with workers. We have to change the economy to a more renewable and more equitable one, and it's going to start from the workplaces with all of you. And it's not enough, like the past, to have a vague promise of retraining to create a new job. We actually need decent jobs where workers can do meaningful work and get good pay and benefits, and to create better communities. And that's exactly what a Green New Deal is about, and it's exactly what you folks are talking about here tonight. And it's in a really exciting moment, because in the work I do with different climate organizations and groups across the country, they are glued and fixated to what you're doing right now. It's no understatement to say that the fight that's happening right now here in Oshawa for the GM plant is the single most important in the country. In labor, in climate, period. Because what you folks are talking about is tackling not just climate change and inequality, but building the world we want here and now. Absolutely inspiring, and in the work I do, climate activists are floored by it. To give you one example, I work with an organization called Organize BC. They're an environmental group from BC, and they've got 300,000 members in BC alone. And in my past work with the postal workers, we came here last spring to promote this idea. And when I told them they were working on it, they couldn't believe it. They put out press releases to media, they notified their members, they created brochures to give out at farmers market, and they paid for ads so more people would know about this on social media. And they told me, they said, we love this idea because we are always fighting against something. We are rejecting pipelines or more tankers carrying crude oil, and you're giving us exactly what we want, and it's led by workers. For years, climate activists have been clamoring for this, and the workers in Oshawa are doing it. We want to do everything we can to stand beside them. Now, I do want to make clear that it's a fight, because for the last couple of decades, we've seen corporations bleeding workers, getting more and more from us, forcing us to work longer hours for less pay and for more injury, while they make more profits. And governments have helped them do it. Now, we've seen that attack ramp up and ramp up, ramp up. No one knows that better than the people here in the room who work at the plant. You've made concessions to GM. You've made sacrifices, all in the name of keeping the plant functional, to keep jobs here, and for what? They've raked in record profits. We made concessions. Workers at the GM plant haven't seen a raise since 2007. Your expenses have gone up, so why haven't your wages? At the same time, GM says they're no longer profitable and they need a bailout. So as we heard, over a decade ago, we gave them $11 billion. And, no surprise, they haven't paid it all back yet. They still owe us $3 billion. Can you imagine if you showed up at the bank and said, my mortgage, I'm done paying it? There's absolutely no way. And there's no way we should let a corporation get away with this. Now, last year, we find out that the corporation, that General Motors, has made $11 billion in profit. At the same time, they're announcing closures of factories across Canada and the United States, and they're moving them down to Mexico and China. And I want to be really clear that our fight, our enemy, is not with Mexican workers who are making $4 an hour. It's with the executives who are raking in obscene profits and devastating Oshawa. They don't care that the people in this room have given decades of their life, their sweat, and their blood to this corporation. They don't care that they're going to devastate this community and lose 15,000 jobs and hurt the entire province. Our enemy is the executives. The CEO of General Motors last year made $29 million. It's shameful. And they're closing these factories just to add another $1 billion. I think they're lucky we haven't run them out of town with pitchforks, quite honestly. Because it's damn well shameful. And if you ask me, we shouldn't pay a goddamn cent for this factory. It should belong to us, the people. If we gave them $11 billion and they still owe us $3 billion, guess what? It's not their plant. And they're still on the hook. Because we found out that to purchase it and to retool it would take just shy of $2 billion. So they still owe us another billion. I think it's up to us to demand it. And that means going against corporations. That means going up against governments who enable them. And it means going up against sometimes the officials in unions and the labor movement who urge calm, when this is not a time for calm. I'm reminded of the great labor leader Michel Chartrand and one thing he said, which was that the labor movement was born illegal and it grew up illegal. And I think if we are going to come of age and fight in this moment, we need to recognize where labor laws no longer serve us, but the corporations and the governments that enable them. Now, I just want to wrap by saying that this is a moment of crisis, but also opportunity. Because the labor movement and workers are on the front lines of climate change, not just in stopping the devastation and the destruction and all of the horrible things that might come down the line, but in reimagining the world we want and building that, building the future, building a more equitable and renewable society. And there are so many people across the country who are standing here with you and ready to go to the line with you. So we're here and we're supporting you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you to the League for your amazing efforts as well. So now we're pleased to have a video statement from Fred Hahn, President of the largest union in Ontario, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, representing over 270,000 members.
Hi, my name is Fred Hahn. I'm the president of Keetch, Ontario. At our convention in May, our members moved and passed a resolution in favor of public ownership and democratic worker control for the plant in Oshawa. That committed our union to solidarity actions up to and including solidarity walkouts and political protests. We represent 270,000 members across the province with tens of thousands of members in Oshawa and Durham region, and we are 100% behind the workers at GM. We know the federal government under the Conservatives and the Ontario Liberals bailed out GM in 2008 to the tune of $10.8 billion, and we know that GM turned a profit of $6 billion in the first 9 months of 2018 alone. Yet they chose to close one of the most efficient and effective production plants in North America, and that means 2,600 jobs, good union jobs, will be lost. Workers aren't to blame. Government must act, they must intervene. We know that the Premier has said the ship has sailed, but he's wrong. We must retool this plant under democratic worker control to meet the climate emergency and to create jobs, and it only takes political will. I look forward to the feasibility study on what retooling that plant could look like to produce good green vehicles, especially electric service vehicles for the public sector. That would be an exciting future for all of us. I want to say congratulations to the Green Jobs Oshawa Network, to the workers at GM. I look forward to the work that you continue to do, and you can count on Keetch, Ontario to be with you all the way.
Fred's not even here and he gets applause. I'll let him know that. He's a great speaker. We have one final video, which is really exciting because it actually is taken from a picket line from my hometown of Flint, Michigan, which is why I knew the Roger and me reference. I moved to Canada 11 years ago from Flint. So we're going to hear from Sean Crawford, a striking UAW member from Flint.
Hey y'all, I'm out here marching with Local 651 in Burton, Michigan today, showing my solidarity. I just wanted to express my support for what y'all are doing up in Oshawa, Canada. It's absolutely necessary to moving forward. we can't trust these companies anymore to provide jobs for our communities. Indeed, Flint, Michigan is a testament to what General Motors will do if we let capital have all the control. I think what you guys are doing up there is great. I support you, and I hope you are successful going forward and provide a good example for all of us so we can make sure that the Great Lakes region as a whole is the engine of the Green New Deal, so we can transform our economy not only for the betterment of workers but for the betterment of the environment and making sure we give an inhabitable planet to our children. So thank you all for what you're doing up there.
That's awesome. My high school is actually a mile away from there, so it's nostalgic to see that. And then I hear his accent and I wonder, is that what I sound like? Here, I think I've somewhat lost my American accent, but maybe not. Thank you so much. So we're going to get to questions shortly. I just want to encourage folks to visit greenjobsoshawa.ca because we just launched a petition today. We keep hearing about the political will that it needs to take, so we do ask folks to fill out the petition. And we do want to thank and recognize politicians that are in the room, including candidates for the federal election. I just want you to know that we do see you and we do appreciate your advocacy and your willingness to be here and learn more about this exciting possibility. So we're going to open it up to questions. I just want to thank you again for your time. As Labor Council President, I walk in the footsteps of greatness, of great leaders and workers who fought many battles before me and before us, but a battle that we carry forward. Unprecedented times call for unprecedented actions. We can do this, and we know that we can make Oshawa the engine for the Green New Deal. Thank you.